Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Delighted to be joined by an old colleague of mine today, Amrit Sandar. Hi, Amrit.
Hello, how are you doing, Simon?
You are the founder and CEO of The Engagement Coach, and we've worked together, and you've done an amazing speech a couple of years ago at our Planning and Productivity Conference. We're going to look today at change. So engagement and change. Clearly the world's been a strange place, and I suspect will continue to be for the foreseeable, and the pace is going to increase. So I think one of the big questions is, can we keep up with change? But before we dive into the detail, I referenced that we both worked together at Boots, Amrit. So do you want to give us a bit of career history, career background, and then reasons and why you set up The Engagement Coach?
So I started my career off as a pharmacist and spent a few years hands-on, with patients and medication, but then went quickly into operations. So I spent most of my time area manager, divisional manager, and overseeing the healthcare agenda for Asda, which was the biggest role that I was doing in healthcare after Boots. And it was at that time, during that time, that I was approached by Asda to head up employee engagement, which seemed like a really strange transition at the time. But actually, it was just an extension of looking after patients and welfare. It was looking after employees and people at work. So seemed like a natural transition for me. Went on to look after employee engagement, head up employee engagement for Asda, worked with Walmart on the global stuff. And it was during that time that I was then approached by Best Companies. This is the organization that runs the Sunday Times Best Companies to Work For. And I was brought in to head up growth and also the senior consultant. So my job was to go into boardrooms to help them understand their data of what people are telling them. But more importantly, what do they need to do to improve engagement? And it was whilst I was doing that, actually, that my role was limited in I could help organizations understand the data, but I couldn't do anything more. And what became apparent was organizations were looking for more support to say, well, hang on, how do I actually go about doing that? And it was at that time then I set up The Engagement Coach, and we've been going for just over 5 years now. So quite a journey.
Congratulations. We've just done 9. So I can guarantee it doesn't get any easier. You don't get any more relaxed about running your own business, and because you kind of live and breathe it, it continues to drive you forward. But yeah, good, amazing success. 5 years in is hats off. I know how difficult it is, and there's blood, sweat, and tears. But hopefully, you're still enjoying it and a lot to look forward to.
Loving it. I think there's a double-edged sword with this. When work becomes your passion, it means a lot to you. So you take it seriously. You live and breathe it. When I'm with my kids, I'm thinking about client problems and thinking about how we solve them. So it's a double-edged sword where you live and breathe your passion. But if you're not careful, it can take over your life. But it's certainly loved every minute of it. And I'm really lucky. We've got a small team here, but everybody absolutely loves what they do. And passion's a really important thing for us. So yeah, absolutely loving it. Thank you.
Good. And yeah, it's amazing when, I'm sure you do the same, I speak to people and they say, oh, it must be amazing opening your own business. You can have a Friday afternoon off, go play golf or fishing or whatever you want. The reality is probably like you, I've never worked harder in my life. And absolutely like you, I'm doing stuff around the house thinking, how do we fix that? How could we do a better job at that? Yeah, well, I think we could do some of this as well. It can become all consuming, which is a good and bad thing, I suppose.
It's interesting. When I set the company up, I remember in the early months, I just kept meeting people who were saying, isn't it brilliant running your own business? Isn't it great? Isn't it fantastic? And I was sat there thinking, no, it's not. This whole myth of it's glorious, it's glamorous, and it is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But the difference is you get to shape the agenda and you get to bring out the talents and all the things you saw that could be improved, you get a chance to do. But it's not without cost. You do work harder than ever. But I guess it feels that much more worthwhile because you're seeing the impact of that. So I completely agree.
Yeah, and it's good that you can, like you say, set the agenda and you can fix some of the things that maybe aren't as good as they should be, and also take the reward and some of the credit with the team for all the amazing stuff you do. So it's with that you get all the real benefits, and like you say, setting the agenda with a smaller group and avoiding the bureaucracy is refreshing.
It is, and just briefly on that, we also get to challenge the status quo. I mean, you've done it, Simon, and I've done it. We've challenged the convention of how things are done because we have had the experience. We've got our hands dirty, and we've taken a step back to say, surely there's got to be a better way. And that's the other benefit of doing what we do. We get a chance to find another way, as opposed to doing what we've always done.
And on that note of finding another way, pace of change in the last 6 months in the world, let alone in retail and hospitality, has increased massively. There's been people doing things from a medical point of view, building the Nightingale Hospital, for example, through to clients we work with who within 2 days have signed off and implemented their Deliveroo strategy or their click and collect, and it's been on the agenda for 6 years. So pace is phenomenal at the moment, and there's all those adages of, in times of darkness, it drives innovation and invention, and you see those big leaps in wars where tech is driven forward because of a necessity. And I've mentioned bureaucracy before. I think some of that is taken out of the mill, and people are prepared to fail or learn from failure to work quicker. We probably in a modern world call it agile, wouldn't we, or sprint methodology. Pace is just phenomenal at the moment in some of the things that we're doing. I have a sneaking suspicion that we will leave some people behind because it's too quick and we've missed the engagement with them, and they get burnt out by change, or it just doesn't land because it's kind of the next bit of change is here before that one's even touched the sides. How do you think this kind of new pace, should it continue, will impact engagement? And how do you think businesses should start to think differently to ensure that it sticks and it's not just we've churned a load of stuff out, but actually in 6 months' time nobody's doing any of it?
I think just on the last point that there is a risk that change, but what change and for what reason? And sometimes change can be a reaction to the environment that we're dealing with. It may not necessarily be the right reaction. And I know certainly from my own experience as an organization, there have been things in my mind that I wanted to get done for the last 4 years. And I needed to take a month out to reflect on what was going on around me before I then reacted. But we then did react, and we're now producing stuff and dealing with strategy and all the things that we wanted to get done. And it has been absolutely intense. And I suspect many organizations are doing the same thing. So it's making sure that we're reacting to the right things first, as opposed to just blind panic, which is possible with the change that we've been through. We know that change leads to this whole fight or flight reaction, and fear comes from uncertainty. Well, we're in huge uncertainty. And when we're in that emotional state, which is what happens with uncertainty, we have got to find ways of rationalizing the world around us. And sometimes that becomes a reaction to what's going on around us, or it can be a thoughtful, a considered approach to say, what's actually going on in the world around us? What does the world need now going forward? And therefore, what sort of change do we need to bring? And, often, Simon, you've seen this and I've seen this, where organizations will do a really diligent and thorough piece of work on developing a strategy. But what happens is only those people who were involved in the creation of that strategy know the background behind it, know the rationale, they know the data points that led to it. Because what happens then is we end up communicating the strategy to say, here's what we're going to do now. And we so often forget the detail behind the why. If it was important for you to know when you were developing the strategy, it's important for everybody to know. When we're doing any sort of change initiatives, it's helping people understand why. We've got a vested interest. Everybody's got a vested interest. And I often talk about the concept of employer engagement. How often do we demonstrate as an employer engagement into the employees? And so we've got a vested interest in making sure people understand the journey, they understand the why. And, this is all run-of-the-mill stuff, but it's so often forgotten in change. And one of the ways now, it's certainly the change we've been through, one of the things that's happened, I think, different to any other incident we've had before, is that leaders have been stripped of the power of knowledge and insights. What I mean by that is, right now, leaders are in the same place as employees. Nobody knows the way forward. We're going to have to work it out. There is no roadmap. There is no one person who could tell us that this is the way forward as opposed to somebody else, because they have no more knowledge or insights. And now everybody knows that. And in that environment where there's been this sort of leveling off. We're all working from home, and many of us will continue to work from home, and this is going to become the norm. and in other environments, we've got a situation where there's been this leveling now that where I think the only way forward is going to be by getting people involved. And, I've taken this back to my pharmacy days, but if you think about the biology of a cell, a human cell, its ability to react to its environment is dictated by the number of receptors it has on the outside of it. And so what we now need to do is think of our employees as receptors. The more of them we involve, the better we can react to our environment. So I think in this environment of change, what we need to do is get to a stage where employees feel involved, their voice matters, and they're part of the solution. One of the things one of the biggest positive distractions we can have is where we are actually helping solve the problem, as opposed to the helplessness of we don't know what to do and we're being told. So during change, yes, the pace of change, it's here, and I think it's here to stay as we carry on reacting and adapting to the environment. But it's how do we involve people? How do we get more people involved to help us understand and shape it? And I think the new role of leaders will be facilitators of this, as opposed to the old way of, they were the knowledge base and they were the ones who were going to dictate and direct the strategy. Now it's a case of they're going to facilitate the creation of that from people who will help shape it. So I think that's probably what's going to happen with change, and it is happening with change. And that requires compassionate leadership. It requires humility. It requires leaders to take a step back and listen to people, involve people. And it also requires an alignment to the organization. So whatever we're looking to do, how does that link into who we are as an organization, our purpose, our mission, and then recognition. There's an awful lot of upheaval that we've been through over the course of 2020 and will continue to go through. And I think it's probably recognizing that change has a very big impact on people. And when we come through the other side, whatever the other side is taking a step back to recognize people, to say, do you know what, I didn't think we were going to get that done.
Some of the things that stand out for me are some of the conversations we've been having with people in the last kind of 4 to 6 weeks, and around simple things of they didn't have a way of telling their colleagues not to come into work. So they couldn't communicate to say, actually, you've been furloughed or the store's shut because we're not allowed to open, to every individual colleague. So there wasn't a communication portal or a way of engaging those people and then checking in to see how they were. Lots of organisations had to rely on store managers phoning individuals, and then clearly you get diluted or different messages and people react in different ways. So again, we talk about the change, the speed of change, and how people will adapt to that, and how leaders need to morph. There's almost, some organisations still some foundation bits that aren't in place of, well, actually, how do we communicate and engage to people in a consistent, uniformed way?
And you're right. There's an awful lot here where I think this has been a massive experiment in psychology, in how people react. We rely on leaders, but actually, who says leaders are coping with change themselves well? And so knowing why things have got to change and the rationale for it doesn't change how easy it might be for you to adapt to change. And on top of that, then as a leader, if you've got to drive change and lead it, you can imagine the pressure that people might be feeling as leaders who aren't driving it. So leaders tend to actually demonstrating vulnerability actually drives trust. And so I think that inconsistency, what we do need to get to a stage of is we don't stop becoming human beings, in the roles that we run and have, whether you're a leader, whether you're a manager, whether you're an employee, we are all reacting and dealing with life the same way. And therefore, they're showing that compassion, showing that humility to say, what do I think they need to know from me? And getting to know your people enough to understand what's going on in their lives. It'll influence how people react, how people behave, and therefore just being truly connected to people to know that, because there isn't a roadmap of how everybody should react or deal with everybody. You and I will deal with different people differently because we know what they're like. And so I don't think organizations can dictate to managers and leaders to say, this is a standardized approach to communicate. This is about getting leaders and managers to actually create relationships with their individuals to say, this is what they need, this is who they are, and this is how I'm going to deal with them, each one of them individually. And hopefully the leaders in turn will get the same sort of treatment. so that we can develop this much more personalized approach to communication, to engagement, to whatever it might be that we're trying to do. But I certainly think there's the inconsistencies of how we are as human beings that's not going away. What we need to do is understand those inconsistencies or those nuances, get to know people well enough to capitalize on that, to say, this is what's going to work for that individual.
We've had a few people come on the podcast who've talked about they've flourished at work when they've brought their true self, or they've stopped wearing the mask. So by saying that, I think what they're really saying is behaving how they think they should behave, and not in an outrageous way or breaking all the rules way, but behaving how they think their boss wants them to behave, rather than bringing their true self and really flourishing because they show who they are. People get to know the real person, and actually that drives their development, enjoyment, and the collective around them. So that it kind of ties into that theme, doesn't it, of engaging your people, really understanding who they are, but at the same time being true to who you are.
Yeah, completely. And I think, imagine if you've got the title director. Well, the clue's in the title. You're directing people. Well, actually, in this day and age, I don't think people need directing. I think what they need is facilitation. If there's a sense of direction of where the organization needs to go, that's part of the strategy. But actually, then there's facilitators. And I often liken it to, with the Winter Olympics, the curling. You've got the granite stone that's projected on the ice. And you've got people scrubbing away, try and smooth the journey of that granite block. But in a way, that's what leaders are here to do now, is to help facilitate getting the best out of people so that they can bring their talents to work. And, we're not going to solve the future problems through a boardroom. It'll be through the collective. And as leaders, what we need to do is feel comfortable enough to say, I don't know, feel comfortable enough to say, I don't have the answers, but facilitate. And be vulnerable enough to say, I'm going to get the best out of the people around me because they have. And it's that old adage of surrounding yourself with people who are better than you, and then letting them go crazy and just do what they do best. But being the enablers and facilitators of that, I think there's definitely much more to do across organizations where we can allow that to happen. And if you think about, if I take it back to flexible working, imagine how people might be feeling where they've been told in the past, flexible working isn't possible. Well, it is. And we know that now. What else is it that they're saying that isn't possible, but it might be? And so I think there's a level of, I call it sort of the emperor's got no clothes on. There's a level of honesty and authenticity that's come in to say, we don't want you to try and be something you're not. What we want is just somebody who's compassionate and caring enough to say, I will help you deliver your best performance. And let me see how I can do that. And it's okay to seek feedback from employees. It's okay to seek feedback from people around you. It's then being the enabler of that to make people or help people be the best they can be.
And it's interesting you talked about at that kind of senior level, surrounding yourself with people that are better than you or that can facilitate that journey. I've just finished reading Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. I don't know if you've read it.
It's on my bookshelf.
Is it? Well, I'll spoil a bit of it for you then. The premise is that it's very easy to surround yourself with like-minded people. And if you keep doing that, you kind of keep getting the same results and missing the opportunity. So the real success is to surround yourself with some people that are like-minded, but also to surround yourself with some people that take you out of your comfort zone, that have conflicting opinions to you. And it's not about creating conflict. It's about finding that middle ground which pushes the boundaries, because otherwise it's too safe. There's no challenge. Everybody nods and agrees, and we've all got the best plan or the best strategy, because there's no opinions which challenge that, because everybody's like-minded. So I was fascinated by it, and some of the stats and visuals in the book around, we all do it because it's comfortable and nice, and we like to work with people we get on with and share similar likes, traits, maybe dislikes even with, and that person that's a bit edgy or a bit pointed opinion or an opinion that sits outside the norm, they're the people we need, because that's where the magic happens, when you get those people involved with the people that have similar ideas. Whatever falls in the middle is the magic.
And if you think about, innovation and creativity, Simon, as a business owner, you'll have done it, I'll have done it, and there's lots of people who have done it. Our brain has the ability to take abstract thoughts and join dots and create something nobody could ever have thought of. Well, it's the abstract thoughts, it's those connections that aren't typically seen as a connection that helps us create things that are brand new and different. And that's not going to come from more of the same. It's going to come from looking at completely, and even ourselves individually, it's almost taking ourselves out of our comfort zone to say, and to go and learn from other areas, other industries, to say, how do they deal with that issue there? And then picking that up and saying, well, how would any of that apply to what I'm doing here? And so that creativity and innovation, it's only going to come from diversity of thinking, people who have completely different ideas, different experiences. It's not going to come from more of the same. And I often do, I use my pharmacy days an awful lot to help shape some of the things I'm doing now, because I saw things in the pharmacy industry that was either good or bad that I could pick up and apply to the current situation to say, actually, I knew a way that we did this, which isn't related, but it's somehow connected. And I think that I will go back to that book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to.
Yeah, it's a good read. Yeah, it's a good read. As these others are, it's at the right level of intellect for me. It's not too over my head, but keeps me engaged enough to keep reading. So with all the change that, like, I think we both agree, and is probably going to continue at pace, there must be a real danger that people get, in old world, what they call change fatigue. So they just get changed out and almost accept or can't accept the fact that there's always change. So there's not a normal, there's not a straight line. It's the normal is that it's not normal, and not everything's up for debate or change, but things just keep changing. So that must be a real part of some of the work you do in terms of engaging teams and people and organizations to help to deal with that.
Yeah, I think the concept of change itself can be a challenge. So if we're changing, all of us are changing all the time. Every day we're evolving, we're learning something new. We're always changing and adapting. But we don't assign a label to it in that way, which sounds like a scary big concept. Our lives are constantly, in fact, we go out of our way to improve our lives constantly. We're looking for change as individuals. And yet, why would an organization not be looking for change? But when we sign labels like change initiatives and change, projects and what have you, it can make them sound scary, but also then, we might have past experiences where it was an awful execution and implementation. I think one of the things we need to get people to understand and get into the realms of, and this is what an awful lot what we do, is help people understand that what change means. When, let's say somebody's going for a fantastic job, it's their dream job. If they were going for this dream job, would they not feel butterflies in their stomach for the interview? Of course they would. Would they not feel nervous on their first day? Of course they would. But this is something they chose to do. This is something they went out of their way to get hold of, and they would have been thoroughly disappointed if they hadn't got that job. So it's understanding that this is the way the human body reacts and our brains react to change, even change that's been warranted and we've sought it. So then accepting that, it's saying, how can we best deal with some of the change? There is an awful lot where even taking time out to think and reflect, in the old days, we used to do all these autopsies on projects. It was just a tick box. We'd sort of get together, talk about all the stuff that everybody knew about and that was obvious. And we'd move on. We carried on making the same mistakes in the next project. Actually, how do we take some time out to reflect, to say, what have I learned today? And if we can get into a stage where every day we're in the mode of what am I learning? What am I going to do differently? What am I really proud of? And we just get into the habit to say, every day there's change going on, and how am I adapting to it? And if everybody at a local level, we start to do that, we can then start to build that in at a organizational level that says, we're always adapting, we're always looking for new ideas. And part of that, Simon, is accepting the fact that not everything is going to work. And so therefore, how do we react to when things don't work? So everything is, my scientific sort of mind and my background is, everything is an experiment. We have a hypothesis and we think one thing might come out, but actually our hypothesis either is proved or disproved. But we don't sit there saying, I'm a failure, or this was a failure. It was a hypothesis. We weren't sure of the results that were going to come out. And I think in the same way, We just need to look at how we do things and see them as experiments and hypotheses and say, here's what we're expecting, but let's see what happens. And then take the learnings from that. And that's what's going to drive innovation and change, to say, we put too much weight on it's got to be a pass or a fail, actually. And it's developing that growth mindset to be in a place that says, actually, we're constantly looking for improvements in our personal lives and at work. How can we do that? What are the experiments we're running every day? And what are they telling us and teaching us? And it's collating that then. It's all very well, all these experiments going on across lots of organizations in different departments. But unless we start to collate and take learnings genuinely, we won't benefit from that. So it's finding ways of driving change in a way that feels like breathing. We do it every day. It's just the culture. It's how we work. I don't know when any last CEO stood up at an all hands meeting to say, let's share the biggest cock up we made this week. But the organizations that do, they're the ones who are saying, and it's okay. We're willing to experiment, because within all that experimentation, there's going to be some gems that come out. But that's the way we work. And it's changing the culture to say, not so much putting a big label on it to say this is change, but actually it's just the way we are. It's an agile mindset.
It's really interesting because one of the words you used there was culture. And for me, that link between successful companies and their change engagement strategy, if you want to call it a strategy or philosophy, is a lot to do with taking away that fear of failure and almost rewarding the challenge or the answer to the hypothesis, as you put it. So I know in organisations I've worked in before, and people in other organisations I've spoken to, and this is an example of somebody you'll know, Stuart Cross, who we work with at Boots. Yeah. Not necessarily in the same departments, but his example when we talked was he visited a store and was stood next to the project manager, and there'd been a big refit, a big new concept, and he kind of said to the guy, bet you're really proud to be involved in this, aren't you? It looks amazing. Bet you're really proud to have your name against it. And he said, well, my name's against it if it's a success. If not, we might have to think differently. All words to that effect. And the point is, clearly there was a consequence if it failed or wasn't meeting the hypothesis or the sales figure or whatever it was, which was a bit of a sad indictment in reflection, that there was lots of positives to take away, I'm sure. And the point was, there was learnings in that first way of setting that store out and laying it out that I'm sure they can take forward and enhance for stores 2, 3, 4, 10, 100. But it was I'm not prepared to put my name against it unless it works.
And that happens an awful lot. This culture of fear, it's driven from somewhere. So it's interesting, at what point does somebody say, well, yeah, it's at this point, there's a culture of fear, but nobody's driving it. It's going to be driven from somewhere. And it's, I remember, again, going back to my pharmacy days, actually, this was pre-Boots. There was an organization I worked with and I hadn't seen it myself, but I heard that one of the managers, we used to get into such a rage when there was bad news that the keyboard would be thrown off the desk, everything that was on the desk thrown off in rage. And when you're in a situation like that, in trying to give that person some bad news or news that wasn't expected, you're not going to do it. You're going to just brush everything under the carpet and just move on, and that's not going to help drive innovation. It's a case of, I guess, it's just the openness and transparency to say this is where we are. And creating that growth mindset, we know so much about that now, and the neuroscience of the brain and psychology, and it's helping leaders and managers to understand. But I think it comes down to then having that understanding is all great, but if we're going to carry on measuring people in the same KPIs, we're just driving the same behavior.
Yeah.
So it's being brave enough to break from that past.
It's an area I'm sure we could discuss for hours, but that whole agile sprint way of working, it is here. I'm pretty convinced it's here to stay and will only accelerate. And like you say, some amazing points there. You've got to align other things behind that, because you can't keep measuring in historic old ways with a new, faster way of working, because you'll just end up with results that I suspect will be quite damaging in terms of those things that fail. The whole point of sprint and agile is to do it quickly, learn quickly, take the learnings, take the failures and move on, not dissect who was responsible for this budget, this spend, why did we get to this place. That completely flies against that whole methodology which was born out of tech.
Yeah, and just briefly on that is making sure that you've got complete alignment. There was one organization who said to us that customer experience is really, really important to us. But if you looked in their KPI, it was on page 40.
Yeah.
And it's just making sure we've got complete alignment to all of that. But yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we could have a whole other debate around strategy, purpose, mission statements and all that kind of alignment. Because, yeah, like you, we see lots of interesting strap lines or statements around customer or intent that aren't necessarily then aligned through the organisation top down. And if they've got outlet stores, whatever that might be, again, it manifests itself there because what's written on the wall isn't how you're treated or served. So that whole alignment of brand strategy, engagement and promise is absolutely there in some organisations, don't get me wrong. In others couldn't probably be more misaligned. But maybe that's one for another day. So Amrit, listen, I've really enjoyed the chat. I always love speaking to you. You've got an amazing brain and it's much bigger and got much more wealth than mine I'll ever have. So I always find it informative and inspiring. If people want to find out a bit more about you and the stuff you guys do, where's the best place for them to find you?
We're prolific on LinkedIn, unfortunately, so you'll find us on there. Otherwise, our website, theengagementcoach.co.uk, you'll find us there. So.
Brilliant. And final question from me for everybody that comes on is, what's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
You can be wrong at the right time and you can be right at the wrong time. Sometimes we, as leaders, we feel that when we're right, it's got to be implemented now. But I've learned one way or another that sometimes you can be right at the wrong time. And so timing is really important. There's a number of projects I've been trying to get off the ground for 4 years, and now suddenly everything's just falling into place, and it was just timing. So that's probably the best advice.
So listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great to catch up with you, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch and there's plenty for us to do together in the future. But for the moment, look after yourself and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Simon. Thanks very much.